Hello, selectors, and welcome back to the Life Burst Podcast. We're talking about the divas in the new Dissona set, and we are now at Piruluk. So Piruluk is an interesting one. I know probably a lot of people have some opinions and would like to see what Piruluk does, and we'll just get right into it. Piruluk is a level 3 blue Elrig that says at the beginning of your attack phase, if all Signy on your field are Dissona, so you gotta play 100% Dissona, target one spell in your trash, and then you may use it. You have to pay the cost, so in order to do it. Its enter ability is draw 3 cards and discard 2, and then its action ability is exceed 4, which basically you only do once per game. This Elrig gets auto when you use a Dissona spell, target a Signy on your opponent's field and give it negative 4,000 until end of turn. You can do that multiple times, right? So you can make one Signy 4,000 and then do that same Signy to negative 8,000, or you can spread the love around. It's up to you. It's pretty modular. This is a deck that has a lot of moving pieces. It's a very much A plus B deck. You need to have A, which is your spells, right? So that you can play your spells from your trash. And then B, and this is the tougher part, literally everything else. We've learned from Mililunes in the past, which are also spells-based kind of decks, tempo decks, really, is that it does make deck building tight, for sure. And that can be a downside on its own. The Dissona spells are very good, but not game-breaking either, is another thing, right? Like, Trouble is I wouldn't call it game-breaking spell, but it is very good. It's got a pretty good life burst, and then its ability to draw 3 cards can just basically pull endless fuel out. You're not going to be able to do stuff like that with your Yuhasabi's Dissona spells. And the new Dissona spells in set 13 are not super, super great. So you're pretty much only going to be using the spells from the original set here. The answer to your question of how many spells should I be running is 8 to 10. Anything more and you start destroying your deck makeup in terms of your what you have. Anything less and you're not going to have the options that you need in your trash. I pulled this deck from, it won GP, I believe GP5. Let me verify here real quick. Yes, GP5. And again, you can always check out the link that I put into my deck lists so that you can see how this one did. You can actually see it in action. They recorded the finals, so you can see how it played against Miko Miko. Yeah, so let's talk about the spells, right? Like, I feel like, unlike the other ones where we talked about Partner Signy first, feels like this one you need to talk about the spells first before you can do anything, right? Because its ability is on the beginning of your attack step, use one of your 3 spells. So it's a modular ability, and generally speaking, what this person chose was to have 4 extras, 3 emergence, and 2 opening signals. Emergence, as you guys may or may not know, is a enter charge. Generally speaking, that's I think what you use it most in this deck for. But occasionally you'll use it on your turn, not necessarily the attack step, to swap a card out from your enter into your hand and then trash your emergence. I don't think this deck runs without emergence. The problem with these A plus B decks is outside of the deck construction rules, which makes it really difficult to run all of them, you end up in a world where you can't actually play your everything else, because you'll draw a bunch of spells and then lose the game because you can't actually do anything with those spells. Emergence allowing you to basically not only filter to get a Signy to your hand, but you drew a hand, you had a level 3 in your hand before, you drew a level 3 and you drew Emergence. This allows you to get a level 1, right? And if it was just a random draw spell, you might hit another level 3 and then just lose the game because you can't fill out your boards. Emergence is sort of the glue that runs this deck together. So I think Emergence is very important in this. It's a 3 of. I could see worlds where it's a 4 of. Yeah, totally, 100%. The problem with these spells is once you have 1 copy in your deck, you don't need, or in your trash, you don't need the extra copies, really. This counts for all of them. So it makes sense why they chose to have it as a 3 of. Same thing with Opening Signal, right? Opening Signal is actually weirdly one of the most important spells in this deck because it allows you to constantly open up lanes with it. But you don't. If you had a handful of Opening Signals, you're going to lose the game. Opening Signal much stronger in your trash than it is in your hand. You just want to make sure that you get at least one in your hand to discard at some point. And then Extra. Extra is a very, very, very good spell. When you use it from your hand, it's Random Drain. When you use it from your trash, it is way more powerful because it doesn't replace itself, right? It gives you an extra card. You go up on one card, and your opponent goes down on one card. So it's literally, instead of just replacing itself and just doing a little bit of a trade, you're going up on resources. So that's why Extra is a 4 of there. It really shines in this deck. Is this deck a full discard your opponent out every turn? If you compare it to Miko Miko, I don't think so. I think this deck can discard your opponent out, but if your opponent's drawing cards, like maybe as a control deck or something, or maybe a Nashi, for example, where they can recur cards, I don't know if it's more than a hindering block for them. But I do think it's a good piece for value in general. You have extra enter, this is a great way to toss it, really. Okay, now that we talked about these spells, we can actually talk about the Partner Signy, which also has to do with spells, so I think it's important to know what the spells are so you know what your options are. It's Save. Save allows you to, when you play it, you look at the top 5 cards of your deck, you can grab a spell among them, and then you put the rest in the bottom in any order, which is pretty cool that you can put it back in any order. It lets you sort of know what's coming up in your future. And I think that's probably one of the cool things about it. Its other ability is that as long as there are a Piruluk on your field, yeah, you get the cards only if you do the Piruluk, right? But the other ability is that at the beginning of your attack step, if you've used a spell this turn, you can draw a card. Or you can enter charge 1. Either or, right? It fixes you on both ends. I think that's really valuable in terms of being flexible of what you need. It is worth pointing out that you can use your attack trigger on Piruluk before save, so that way you can still get your enter charge or your draw just by using the spell, right? If you don't have any way to do that, one of the good ways to do it is you can emergence. It's free. You can just enter charge 1, and then you can get yourself a draw card or something from the save. The rest of the deck is gonna function after that. You know, it's gonna follow suit after that. So we'll go jump back to the Elrig deck here, just to talk about how we're kind of surviving for a while. X Echo allows you to draw a bunch of cards. It's like basically a worse version of Machina, or not Machina, Madoka Float. It is worse. A lot of people, I think X is free, especially if they're like, well, what if I put 10 red cards in my deck? Now X is super free. The answer is it's not. There are going to be games you miss on the opening stuff, and missing on your X Echo, so that way you don't have your one stop available at turn 2 is probably pretty close to a death sentence. So you need at least 10 cards that are red in your deck. I'm comfortable with 12. To make it good, you would need at least 16. But no one's really playing that high of it as a red splash. But I just wanted to talk about X Echo so that way people knew a little bit more about it. I know people have asked in the past how many you need to run X Echo. X Crossfire is really good. Allows you to burn enter. I think that's pretty good. These are short games that we're playing nowadays in Desona meta, so just crimping on enter is always a pretty good plan. Mel Revise is literally the counterpart to X Crossfire. You get 2 enter of your choice from your trash back to your enter. And it's good because this deck is actually quite enter hungry. You do have to pay for the effects of the spells that you're casting, and often you're using emergence to get a Signy back from your enter to your hand, so that's like using the enter. So it is actually quite an enter hungry deck. I don't think people process that at first. So it can be hated out in terms of its enter, That is something to worry about sometimes, because like Miko, for example, while not being a strictly enter burn deck, crimps you on your enter a little bit. So does Black Tama, for example. So there's a cost to it. And then you got Mel Invisible. I don't think we need to talk about Mel Invisible. It's one of the best green support cards that you can possibly go. You've got Xenocluster. I think in this deck, it probably is more about protecting your enter than it is anything else. Like I said, this deck can be quite enter hungry. And then you got Unrest. Unrest being here, being genuinely not just a catch-up card. This is a put your opponents off balance card. You've got a lot of other, extras that you're going to be casting. So I think this is a good way to get a lot of those decks that aren't necessarily prepped to have an onslaught of discard tossed to them. Way to get them off on bad footing. And then we'll jump into the main deck itself. So the Piruluk here is mostly just a one-of to help add to the discard quota, and that negative 3,000 actually can be quite important. Sometimes this deck doesn't get the opponent to 0 cards in hand, especially if they're a green deck. Or sorry, green deck. Yeah, green decks too. But blue. And so the random discard could be like, I've lowered my opponent down to 3, which means now I have a 1 in 3 shot of cutting a guard out. And I think that's where that card shines. Outside of that, it's not super great in this deck. I think it's a flex spot. Bang is not a flex spot. Kills Exia. This deck does target quite a bit with its once per game. And Exia can crimp on its plans pretty efficiently. So I think Bang's a good card. I think there's any other question about it. We've got Firecracker here. You have extra cards in your hand to toss away. Firecracker becomes better. Pond Turtle's in the same boat. You got extra cards in your hand to toss away, so Pond Turtle becomes better there too. Wild Wolf, there are times... Wild Wolf is sort of like fits the areas that Firecracker doesn't, right? Firecracker, against a deck where you're trying to probably not go completely negative on hands, Firecracker is worse, right? And you may want that negative on hand for Pond Turtle instead. Like in the aggro matchup, you may actually genuinely think it's probably better to get rid of their hand than it is to open a lane. I'm not racing those people, right? Then Wild Wolf fits that other half, right? Wild Wolf gives you the way to deal damage with Pond Turtle on the field and not have to super worry about your hands. You can still Lancer through. Love It here is a more of... We've seen Love It in pretty much a lot of the decks prior to this. Love It is a 4-of in this deck because it enter burns, and it enter burns particularly well. I think this deck has the ability to kind of put off giving the opponent enter. It can't do it forever, right? Like, I think Miko's actually a little better at that than this is. But Love It has the ability to, like, especially when paired with something like an opening signal, delay the opponent down on some enter. And again, these games aren't very long. Dissona matches aren't quite long. 2 Yotsuba. This is just to go positive on hand. It's not super great when you are up against an aggro matchup. Is pretty good when you're up against these tempo or control matchups. Say if we talked about Servant, 2 Matcha. You want to run more Matcha. I mean, like, that's kind of this thing, is that because all of your spells have life burst, you're actually kind of screwed on the life burst department, like, of what you can run. And this deck would appreciate having more Matcha because it allows you to discard discard spells to get not spells, right? To get Signy. Or the opposite, it helps you get a spell when you're looking for a spell sometimes. So I think this deck would benefit from having an extra Matcha, but I don't exactly know how you fit it in. I think the only way that you really fit it in is this Lallaroo. I think I haven't ever really been super impressed by Lallaroo. I get why it's here. It's to help make, red quota, right? 11 means that your X is more has higher chances to hit with its X echo. So I get it. You'd probably have a fair amount of extra things. It's weird because you don't necessarily want to use your spells super early, and Lallaroo asks that you kind of do that. But it's a fine one-of tech, I think, for the Life Burst slot. So yeah, I think it's probably fine. And then we talked about all the spells here. I think Piruluk is a very, very I think it's a cool deck. I think it's a good deck. I think it's a fun deck. I think it plays differently than most other decks in the format. It is a complicated deck. A lot of times you can spin your wheels and do nothing with it, right? Is also an option that could be bad. Whereas again, and I said this before in my Nanashi video, but there is a certain strength in being less flexible and more powerful. This sort of bucks that trend and does the opposite. It allows you to be more flexible than powerful. If that calls to you, cool. It's still a good option. But I think there are going to be times where you're like, all right, well, what do I do here? And you just like draw a bunch of cards and go like, oh yeah, I don't know what to do here. And I also think like there are going to be games that you're probably gonna like be like, enter charging is the right way to go, and you'll enter charge and then you'll get blown out because you didn't make the right decision. And that can cost you games, right? Especially over a longer terms, right? If your games are like, if you're doing 4 or 7 rounds of Swiss. So I think it's a good deck though. I think it's still in the top tier. I would play it. I would definitely play it, right? Like I wouldn't play Millaloon right now. I think I would play this if I was going to play over Millaloon. And I liked Millaloon. So yeah, I think it's a good deck. Tell me what you guys think about it down in the comments down below.